and have our emissions rise with fossil fuels and then decline. There has been a furious debate in the media on this issue by leading scholars, and people have commented on various aspects of it. We in Shakti decided to commence a series of webinars to bring together scholars, stakeholders to debate various aspects of it. This is a sequel in that series. We had 4 such webinars earlier, and today's one focuses on cities. What we have been talking about so far is what are India's technology options, policy options, societal, social issues for long-term decarbonization, potentially reaching zero emissions at some point in this century. What we're clear about is that if the world as a whole has to reach zero, at some point in this century, India too will have to reach zero. Whether that point is in 3 decades, 4 decades, 5 decades, that should come from modeling, analysis, and good sophisticated analyses. But what is clear is at some point we will be reaching zero emissions. Now, in coming to today's webinar, why cities? It's just a coincidence that yesterday IEA released a report on cities' role in climate action. And the numbers are quite clear. At the global level, 50% population lives in cities. Cities account for world's 75% energy, and cities account for close to 70% of global CO2 emissions. So it's quite clear that from that lens, if you look at these numbers, the action lies in cities. And if we can tackle cities, largely we would have made a significant progress in achieving the climate solution as far as cities goes. But however, it's not that simple because and there are various factors. For example, these numbers would suggest that a lot of emissions do come from cities. A lot of energy is consumed in cities. However, the sources for these may be outside cities. For example, a lot of electricity is consumed in cities, but the supply of electricity is from outside cities' jurisdiction limits. The scope for rooftop photovoltaics has been limited so far, and most of it does come from outside. Likewise, if we talk about electric vehicle e-mobility plans, while cities help in providing charging infrastructure and deployment of EVs, but the actual manufacturing issues in EV, they are beyond cities' limits. So first question is, what are the issues that are within cities' jurisdiction limits? What are beyond cities' limits? Second is the decision-making process of what lies with states and what lies with cities. And this varies from city to city, state to state. It's a very dynamic thing depending upon the political culture of the state, the civil society, citizenry in decision-making and making these changes happen. So that's a brief background or context for today's webinar, friends. We are delighted that today we have a very distinguished panel who will deliberate on this. We have split this webinar into 2 parts. The first part will have a dialogue between Shri Aditya Thackeray, Honorable Minister for Tourism, Environment and Protocol, Government of Maharashtra, with Shakti's chairman, Mr. Jamshed Godrej. On behalf of all colleagues in Shakti and on behalf of our chairman, I welcome Shri Aditya Thackeray. Welcome to you, sir, for this webinar, and thank you for your time.
Thank you.
In the second part, we have distinguished panelists from various spheres who will discuss the issue in some more detail. We have Dr. Rajiv Gowda, a leading academician and a former member of Rajya Sabha and an active thinker in this space. We have Mr. Ashish Rao Ghorpade, who is a leading scholar with ICLEI. And we have Pooja Tiwari, who is from Bloomberg Philanthropies, who represents philanthropic space. We also had invited Manisha Mahiskar, and Principal Secretary Environment, Government of Maharashtra. She had agreed to come, but she had to back out at the last moment because of some emergent family circumstances. So with this, I will stop. I will request our chairman, Mr. Jamshed Godrej, to lead the discussion with Honorable Minister. The invite suggested a fireside chat. The COVID and all prevents us lighting a fire. So we can assume there is a virtual fire and we can talk around. So over to you, Mr. Godrej.
Yeah, Anshu, thank you. And I'm not able to put my camera on. I think somebody in the control room is not letting me put it on. So if that can be done.
Oh, really? Aditi,
please check right now. You should be able to.
Yeah, okay. Yes, I've got it now. Thank you. So hello, Aditya, and welcome to this webinar. I really appreciate the fact that you have shown a high level of dynamism in the state of Maharashtra and specifically for the city of Mumbai. And I wanted to just explore with you what are the things that have really motivated you and sort of been instrumental in your passion and interest in this area. I have had a long time been chairman of the Worldwide Fund for Nature in India. And I've spent a lot of time with my colleagues in WWF India and globally, concerned and working on these issues of conservation. As you know, the threats to the planet and to our country, our cities, our states is enormous. It's not just the recent weather events that have taken place, but when you see a whole series of events taking place around the world, you realize that what the scientists have been saying, that with climate change, we should expect more extremes, which means, much more heat in the summer, much colder winters, a lot of rain in the rainy seasons, and a lot of drought in the drought season. And these extremes, are going to be more and more exaggerated as the sort of tipping points are reached in different parts of the world. Science tells us that we need to stay below 1.5 degrees centigrade increase in the average temperature of the globe before the end of this century. But we are already experiencing effects of 1.5 degree exceeding 1.5 degrees. So I thought I would just sort of ask you, how did your interest develop in this area? And how do you approach this whole subject of climate change? Your portfolio, of course, also includes tourism. And we know that, tourists always want idyllic locations to have a wonderful holiday in. And if their holiday is disturbed for any reason, it could be COVID, it could be climate change, etc., then they are not happy either. So, of course, tourism is a huge economic driver for any, wherever, any country, any city, any place. It has a huge value addition. So, I mean, when you put all this together, how do you see, your portfolio and responsibility as comes to Maharashtra and specifically to Mumbai, since we're talking of cities today?
So thank you for getting me on this, because it's an honor to be interacting with you. Been seeing, the work that you've been doing for wildlife, for environment. It's for people like us, it's quite inspirational, to be very honest. For me, how I came into this, or how I became passionate about environment and climate change, I think there are two factors to it. Largely my family, be it my grandfather, my father who's a wildlife photographer at heart, and of course, my brother. So my brother is quite the one who's always in the forest. He's behind new species, discovering them. He's discovered and published on 33 new species, right from snakes to snails and different things. But, I'm not someone who could be deep diving so much into wildlife as he does, but he's into conservation. He's into flora fauna conservation. So that is one of his aspects. And I've always had this little interaction with nature out there. But where my concern for the environment really comes in is as much as we start tackling daily issues for governance, for administration, for city planning each day, you realize that the biggest issue today and the biggest hurdle is climate change. Anything that you want to really plan, any new road, any new development issue, climate change has always been a factor. And I was just saying this before I got into this video call, that it's quite a coincidence that today when we're speaking about climate change in cities, we're facing one of the worst natural calamities that we faced in recent times, where 6 or 7 of our districts are quite honestly underwater because of a deluge. And rainfall that no one could really measure, because Mahabaleshwar has got almost 600 mm of rain. We started counting in inches. But the fear really that I draw is a couple of years ago, I think the year was about 2004 or 5, we had watched a movie in school called The Day After Tomorrow. And, I keep repeating this story because it's so true. And that's where the fear struck in my mind really deep. The climate change issues that they've shown in Day After Tomorrow, most of it about flooding and the global precipitation measures changing. We thought back then, okay, this is not something which is really relevant to us. It's probably something that's going to be for the next generation, or for generations down the line, not so immediately. It would be probably 100 years down the line. But today what we see is exactly the same things happening around the world. If you see the global issues that we are facing, the bushfires in Australia, the negative 60 degrees in Seattle, and then plus 50 degrees in Canada. Then you've got Germany, you've got China underwater, you've got London underwater in some parts, and regularly that we see in Mumbai. Even in terms of Mumbai, when we look at be it cities like Bengaluru, Chennai, Mumbai, Ahmedabad, Surat, Delhi, NCR, and when we look at waterlogging, whenever we have rainfall, obviously there's a lot of opinions that come in. There's a lot of tweets that happen, some of them politically motivated, some of them just generally, frustrated about the city life. And we do speak about the crumbling infrastructure of cities. And what we've got to realize that it's no longer about urban flooding anymore. It's no longer about the crumbling infrastructure anymore, because most of these cities are equipped with the maximum technology you can have to deal with something like waterlogging. This is about climate change, because on a day-to-day basis, we've been seeing rainfall that's more than about 200 mm in a span of 4 hours or 5 hours, and no city in the world can really hold it. And like Dr. Bhardwaj was also saying, I think what is very crucial in terms of climate change and mitigation and adaptation, it is the cities that should, would, and could lead the way forward, because we are probably the biggest problem for climate change, and we are probably the biggest solution for climate change, because the impact, the footprint that we can have on climate change mitigation and adaptation is tremendous. I think for us, what was sort of a misguided effort till now, personally in my opinion, is whenever we've spoken about afforestation or rainwater harvesting or percolation or anything to do with nature, we go out to the forest, which is already thick of forest cover, and we start planting trees or seeds and stuff like that. But what we don't realize is, in compensation to that, we're actually destroying the natural environment and surroundings that we are living in our own city. And what we are destroying it with, be it concrete, be it steel or whatever, is found on our own planet. So I think the bottom line to that is, if we do everything in a balance of what the other word for it would be sustainable development, then we can live and coexist with nature. Because normally what we say is, let's save the planet, let's save our nature. But we forget that we are part of the same planet or nature. We are a part of it. We are not separate, or we're not from a different planet. We're not destroying the planet with elements from a different planet altogether. It's what we do with our own hands is coming from the same planet that we're living on and utilizing things from. So I think cities would and could, like I said, definitely play a big role. And that's where I am pushing the agenda for climate change mitigation and action.
Yeah, thank you. That was really useful, and great description of your interest in this area and your responsibility in the government. And, cities, as Anshu also mentioned earlier, I mean, they are the engine of growth. I mean, without cities, we will not see our economies thrive the way that they are around the world. And as you rightly pointed out, they are both, part of the problem as well as part of the solution. As far as cities are concerned, one of the crucial aspects has been administration in cities. I think we have seen different models of governance in different parts of the world. In India, we don't have the same type of governance that, say, in many other major cities. If you take London or New York or San Francisco, any of these big cities, they have their own local government with empowered mayors and an organization. We don't have that. I mean, and that's not going to change overnight. So within our system, how do you see, the ability for cities to sort of grow whilst, I mean, we obviously can't ignore the importance of the hinterland and the agriculture and people living in slightly extended areas around cities. But how would you see the development of cities taking place? I mean, broadly speaking, do you think that the ideas, for instance, there is an architect in Paris who has been talking about some concept called the 15-minute city, which means that anybody, wherever you live, within 15 minutes, you can, your place of work, your place of entertainment, your shopping, whatever is always available. You can walk to it, you can cycle to it. I mean, these are the sort of concepts which are being talked about. What is your thinking about the development of our cities and specifically of Mumbai? Of course, Maharashtra has other big cities also, Pune and Nagpur and Nasik and etc.
So for sure, I mean, in terms of cities and urbanization, I think that's a big question that we speak about. And normally, again, in the last decade, the word urbanization has got its glamour and the blots that it carries along. I think what we could really do in the sense of, being talking about a city or this urbanization having an urban sprawl across the state or the country, because largely about 50% of the population is urbanized today. We need to redefine what cities mean. We need to redefine what urbanization means. If urbanization only means concrete jungles, I think we've got something wrong there, because most of the people, in terms of whoever's evolved or moved up the ladder in terms of the socioeconomic strata, comes from a small town, a hometown, or a village to an urban center like a Mumbai, Pune, Nasik, Nagpur, Thane, looking for a job. And as he escalates one by one, he starts living near his workspace, which is probably the central banking district or the main corporate district. Then he finds a bigger space, he moves a little away from that. Then he finds a bigger home, he moves into the suburbs. And when he's accumulated a good amount of money, he goes back to the country life, which is actually the village he could have probably come from. So what we don't realize is we need a balance of both. We've started looking in terms of, if you see Pune or even Nagpur, you have a lot of buildings and housing societies, a lot of small bungalows who've got rooftop farms, rooftop gardens, gardens in their own compound. So what we need to realize is, be it urban, be it rural, we need to define what it is, because the good of both urban and rural needs to be balanced in both ways, even in cities and in villages. Because when we speak of urbanization, it cannot just be rampant cutting of trees or filling up of lakes, to create something of a different kind. What we need to do in terms of urbanization is figure out the mold it fits into. If urbanization would mean rainwater harvesting and percolation and better stormwater drainage, better sewage treatment plants, I think that urbanization is really helpful for us to take spread into the country. If we mean better solid waste management, if we mean better vehicle access or public transport access, that urbanization could be really helpful for most of our villages. If we mean the use of technology in climate resilient agriculture, if we mean better electricity supply to the farms, if we mean solar pumps, if we mean drip irrigation as a part of technology that's moving from the urban sector to the rural sector, I think that urbanization is really, really helpful. So I think these efforts we need to push out. In terms of cities being 15-minute city, most of our cities, especially across India, having come to life after the age of the motor car, they're not planned to be 15-minute cities. Cities like London or Paris are radial cities. Most of New York is, again, a motorable city. So you wouldn't probably find something in 15 minutes distance. But I think the concept we could adopt is 15 minutes through a public transport system. So you could get onto a metro, public transport bus, a cab, which is green, and get to your place in 15 minutes. So I think these are some of the concepts that we need to redefine for a world that is rapidly developing, and attach the word sustainable to almost everything. So even if we're talking of a rural life or an urban spread, urban sprawl, a suburban area, I think the benefits of urbanization, better healthcare, better education, better lifestyle, those, if carried as the benefits of urbanization to the rural villages, could help us balance jobs, could help us balance migration, could help us balance migration due to jobs or climate crisis. I think that is a major benefit that we could take to the villages.
Yeah. You're absolutely correct in your diagnosis and some of your ideas that you've been talking about. I think the earlier concept was always that there is one big downtown area where everybody goes to work, and there is, then somebody lives far away from it. So you have to continuously travel up and down. We have seen that in Mumbai. Of course, Mumbai geographically is a north-south city. But yeah, but I mean, when we think about how development can take place, the concept of 15-minute city actually talks about multiple centers for cities. So you have many little mini cities within a city. That's the idea. And your idea of using the metro and other public transport to connect the city is absolutely correct. I mean, there has to be a limit to the number of cars that any city will be able to
exactly.
have.
So when we talk of even a development plan, for example, Mumbai is a development plan 2034, Pune is making one, you've got other cities in India making one. But for us as metro cities where we are already saturated with the development, we can't rezone it very easily. It's not going to be simple unless you have an urban renewal that's coming in place. For example, Dharavi, that would probably completely change the face of the city, or something like the Mumbai Devi area where you can actually have an urban renewal. So these are centers where we could actually do walk to work and things like that. But, it's going to be city in cities.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, this is exactly the right concept, city within a city. And I think that there's no doubt that COVID, has brought about greater consciousness amongst people about the connection between healthcare and the climate change, development, etc. I mean, the people have realized that when everyone was forced to work from home, and it's only because of the marvel of modern technology and the internet and the ability, like today, talking to you from a distance, that we are able to actually continue with our lives, our businesses, etc. And but the danger that we see in many cities around the world is that if pandemics like the COVID, were to increase, if these types of viruses and infections, etc., were to increase, what is the resilience that cities would have, and how do we build that resilience in to protect ourselves from all sorts of health-related issues? I mean, today we talk of COVID, but we know in Mumbai, we've had all sorts of diseases over the years. And even today, for instance, tuberculosis is still a major problem in a city like Mumbai because of crowding. And in the past, we've had the plague, we've had all sorts of problems, but cities have to be resilient because they are the engines of growth. So we need to build that resilience. So your thoughts on how we build resilience?
I think it's probably one of the first times in 100 years that governments have actually started focusing a lot on healthcare. And we've also started realizing a lot more about the value of our own dear and near ones. We've started, calling and asking people how they're doing. We've started getting together. After being in isolation, we've started realizing the importance of just, responsible behavior towards nature, towards work, worshipping work, and in terms of the quality of life that is needed. People who could get to work from home have actually started doing that. People who could stagger their work hours have started doing that. A lot of people I know who have also started working from, like I said, the suburban areas or city spaces outside Mumbai, be it, the near rural areas, be it isolated homestays. But nonetheless, we have to look at one of the stats, which is very, very crucial for our own country. The western coast of India, largely, if you see the plague, if you see the Spanish flu, if you see the current pandemic of COVID-19, we have been hit much more on the western coast for some reason than the other parts of India. So be it Maharashtra, be it Gujarat, be it the northern quarter of the left side, I think that is more vulnerable. We need to see what it is really. We need to figure out if it is a climatic thing, if it is, how it sustains more. But apart from that, I think what we really need to do, apart from resilience, is one of the biggest issues that we need to address today is housing. Housing, education, and health. These three issues really matter the most to us and, to all of us. Fortunately for us in India, education and healthcare, though largely affordable, has to be more accessible to the people. Education can bring about a lot of change in our society, in our civic behavior, in our responsibility, in our everyday living, and of course, upping the quality of life. While on the other side, of course, healthcare is something that we really need to focus on. Today, when we've had a pandemic, of course, all of us as corporates, as governments, as private sector, public sector, we've not seen the difference between each other. We've, right from vaccination to testing people to isolating people or creating jumbo COVID centers, we've all come together as one human race to, fight against COVID because it's a matter of survival. Likewise, I think we need to realize that climate change, zoonotic diseases, all of that is going to be a matter of survival. And I've often said this before, that we don't need incentives for survival. That's our basic instinct. And if we have to do that as the human race, when we speak, the developed world or westernization, but what we need to really pull through those, from cities or states like Singapore or any other country in the world where you have better healthcare, is how do you make good healthcare accessible to the common man, as is in a time like pandemic today? How do you make quality education? How do you bring quality and equality in education? I think that is really crucial. I think these two factors, if we can really look into, most of it would be, streamlined. And the third, of course, in a city like Mumbai, one of the biggest issues is housing, where you have a lot of informal housing, and that affects the quality of life, that affects healthcare, that also affects climate change. That is something we're really deep diving into currently, because that's one wound that's opened up big time.
Yeah. When President Biden became president in the US, he said that climate change will be all of government action.
Yes.
So it doesn't matter, which part of government you're in, but whichever part of government you're in, climate change will have to be part of your planning process. Do you think that's a good idea? And how do you think we could do something?
That is not just a good idea, that's really important and imperative right now. It's about time that we do this. And I just regret the fact that this climate change talk has started in 2020s. It could have started in 1980s, 1970s at the level that we are talking today. Because back then, we at least had an option to turn back from the highway that we've set onto. Today, if you ask me, looking at the world, looking at the reports that we are facing every single day in terms of precipitation, in terms of hailstorms, in terms of every calamity that we're facing, just last year, Maharashtra's dispensed almost 13,500 crores in terms of compensation due to calamities arising from climate change. Likewise, the whole country has done its bit in terms of compensation. But when we say that we have 1 decade remaining for climate change action, I think that's too long a time we're giving to ourselves. It's not so much time that we have in our hands. Looking at, if you just take a world map or just Google climate change issues around the world, you have, Siberia burning, you've got Oregon burning, you've got bushfires in Australia, you've got floods around the world. It is a scary scenario. And to think that we have the luxury of another 10 years for climate change action, I think we're fooling ourselves. We have to act unitedly. We have to be faster than what we are today. We've got to realize that this is not about incentives. This is about what you need for survival. And if we've got to survive the next decade, we need to adapt whatever we can, because I think, again, we've gone past the time that we could stop climate change. It's not in our hands anymore. And nature is such a thing that, it's like dinosaurs. Dinosaurs were wiped out, probably the human race. And I'm not predicting a doomsday scenario, but the fear is real. Look at the amount of lives a zoonotic disease like COVID has taken. Look at the amount of lives threatened by floods. Look at the amount of lives threatened by droughts. This is big, and this is something that we've never seen before. We need to act swiftly. And I believe I was reading somewhere about Montreal. It's got a climate test for every of its city decision that the city council passes. So likewise, in fact, I have been pondering on an idea which I would probably write to the Honorable Prime Minister, to have a national council for climate change. And most of the important decisions that are taken in the country, of course, there will be some hurdles when we're talking of development. But I think if we can have reasonable sustainability added to it, we could really figure out a way ahead, because finally it's about finding the balance.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. I mean, we have to have a balance between development and action for climate change. There's no doubt. And each one depends on the other, and each one threatens the other. So clearly there's a good need for that.
And if we have responsible development, we can really, mitigate climate change, because development would mean better proper homes. So your dependency on cutting something like a forest wood in for cooking meals, that would reduce. If you have better homes with your own sewage treatment plants in the complexes, your amount of disposal into the seawater which is untreated would be much lesser. So development is actually needed for climate change mitigation, but we need to have it sustainable.
Yeah, the Confederation of Indian Industry, about 15 years ago, we started this drive in India to build green buildings. These are essentially rated buildings. Today, not just rated buildings, but we would like each building to be a net zero building. And it's possible even to retrofit older buildings and make them green buildings, and even make them net zero buildings. I would think that for Maharashtra, this would be really important, because we have a lot of buildings to build, whether it's for housing or for other purposes. And we need to move and thrust on green buildings. India today has the second largest stock of rated green buildings in the world. And this is because of the Green Building Center in Hyderabad that CII started and moved throughout the country. And we'd like, Maharashtra, for instance, and especially Mumbai, to make it almost, I can't say mandatory, but close to mandatory for every building, new building to be a green building, and, give incentives for older buildings to become green buildings. What do you think of that idea?
So we're working on a couple of fronts on that, and I would love to actually interact with the CII and get the report so that we can make it mandatory, because it's time that we work on that, because even in the environment department, where we give permissions for new complexes and housing complexes and industries, we've actually started enforcing stricter climate change and adaptation measures for the same, be it rainwater percolation pits, rainwater harvesting, sewage treatment plants, green belts. We're also exploring a way to work with the MIDC to implement the green belts that are shown on paper always. We're trying to get them to do that, because a lot of CSR can be used by factories in that. We're also upping the quality of life for the factory workers there, for the management there. So that is one of the things. Apart from that, like you rightfully said, working on two things. One is, of course, the newer buildings and the new housing societies or office complexes that come up. And we probably could also have, a convention or a conference with architects, urban planners, to make it more green, and how can we actually define what green buildings are? Because a thing like a glass building, now that's a Scandinavian concept for absorbing more heat. Whether it is possible or feasible or really wanted in a country like India, where we already face a lot of heat, I think that is one of the challenges. But going beyond that, in terms of retrofitting, last year on Gandhi Jayanti, we started a movement called Maji Vasundhara. And normally, as governments, we tend to preach to the world about climate change, and we tell them, use public transport, your buildings should be retrofitted, do this, do that. I said, let's start with ourselves, because the government's footprint is the largest in all cases. So we started working on all the 5 elements. And through whatever our officers were fighting as the second wave of COVID, in terms of divisional commissioners, collectors, municipal commissioners, we've actually started working on planting more trees in urban forests within the city, and more in our own headquarters of the municipal corporation or the government or the collectorate, starting to do that. We're starting to retrofit our own offices for rooftop solar, sensor-based lighting in corridors and toilets that are not often used, converting to LED lights, having rainwater harvesting and percolation pits. So we started that movement, but yes, we need to give it more of a push to actually retrofit the amount of new older buildings. And of course, the new ones will have all these facilities, because what is a good thing is a lot of young women and men, a lot of new home buyers are actually more aware about climate change, and they're also wanting these facilities in their own buildings. So that is a major sector we could really work on.
Yeah. In fact, when we started the movement for green buildings, the first green building we built in Hyderabad cost almost 40% more than a normal building, because none of the materials that we needed for making a green building were available at that time. Today, actually, there is no cost increase. It is more, it's more the mindset that, yes, I will have a green building. And, even if it's 1 or 2% more, that's fine. But you have to start with the proposition that every building must be a green building. And I think that if we can move in that direction, that would make a huge difference to what, as you know, there's a concept of urban heat island,
Yes.
Because cities are so concentrated and there's so much energy used in cities, that it does become a somewhat heat island. Temperatures are slightly more than in the surrounding areas. And green buildings can make a huge difference to that. So I think I would encourage you to move as rapidly as possible on green buildings, both new as well as existing buildings to be retrofitted.
We're doing green buildings, and along with that, we're also looking at other infrastructure to be more green. So in cities like Mumbai, Pune and all, we're trying to have urban thickets, even in traffic islands that are big enough to have at least 50, 60 trees. But Mumbai, Pune and Mumbai, Nagpur highway, and now the Mumbai, Bengaluru highway, what we're looking at is actually greener highways. So we're solarizing our highways. For the last 2-3 years, I was chasing that. Today, we've come to a point where we can have 3 solar parks on the Mumbai-Nagpur highway, generate almost 250 megawatts of electricity, solar energy through this highway, we're looking at planting almost 100,000 trees alongside the highways, and these will be avenue trees and in different layers. So you obviously have indigenous trees, you have fruit flower trees, but you also have that whole green belt, because normally on a highway with a lot of concrete, you tend to feel much more heat than, in a street like in Mumbai or any other city. So I think that is also something we're looking at. And like I said, it's climate emergency right now.
Yeah. So you mentioned this program of yours, which you started called Maaji Vasundhara Abhiyan. Could you tell us more about it and what you hope to achieve?
So we were looking at basically, like I said, to start off with, and last year was UN's Year of Nature. And in terms of nature, what do you really do with nature? So we looked at the 5 elements of nature. And we said, if we are to contribute anything to a global movement about nature as the Environment and Climate Change Department, we need to start from ourselves, look inwards and see how the government can really transform itself, adapt itself to protecting nature through the 5 elements. Now, for us, of course, we were battling with the second wave of COVID, but overall, we've planted almost 21.5 lakh trees across Maharashtra in terms of the urban centers, and then rural separate, of course. Through rainwater percolation and harvesting pits, we've saved almost as much water as Maharashtra consumes in a day. And we're looking at much more in that sense. So all 5 elements of nature, be it in terms of energy, we're looking at rooftop solar, we're looking at LED lights. So this is a movement that was started only for the government offices to start off with. But as a result of which, and the popularity that gained over a period of time, you had a lot of local groups, NGOs, local politicians, MLAs and MPs being a part of this, because we had cash prizes for the districts that really do well for schemes that they plan for the next year. So it's almost like a Swachh Bharat thing, but on 5 elements of nature, ranging from better solid waste management to disposal of wastewater, to cleaning of your villages or your cities, to better energy works, and also self-auditing in terms of energy usage, self-auditing in terms of transport. So if the municipal commissioner or if a divisional commissioner or a collector lives close to his office, can he walk it down for a day or 2? Can he go by a bicycle? Can he use carpool? So all of these things put together, that really generated a lot of interest. And now we're looking at a lot more people, be it corporates, be it diplomats, be it schools, colleges, giving them toolkits, a certain amount of deeds that they can really work on and engage with us.
Yeah, very, very innovative ideas. I think this is a great concept, and I hope that we can do whatever we can from Shakti's point of view to help you. Just to mention about Shakti, we work with over 100 partners in India on various aspects, on energy, on transport, on climate resilience, etc. Recently, the government of Bihar has approached Shakti to work with them on developing their climate action plan for the whole state. And we've started that work. And, I think these are ideas that if states come together on these type of ideas, I think there's a lot of learning Maharashtra is actually quite well ahead of Bihar, say, for instance. Say if you have a partnership, between states, that this concept of twin cities around the world, but twin states in India could be another idea, that 2-3 states come together, work on climate action plans, learn from each other, see what works. Do you think that would be something that we could discuss about?
I think that is very, very crucial because finally, like I said, when we speak about the environment department, till now, we've always been a regulatory department. We've always been something that is, giving permissions and putting notices on industry saying, okay, you're releasing wastewater or not. But when we look at the global scenario and the importance of climate change for a country like India, 1.3 billion people leading the way, and a country where our basic ethos of worship is nature worship. Most of our religions stem from nature worship. Agni, Vayu, Bhumi, Jal, Akash. I think this is the place which could really lead the movement. And most of our worship, like I said, we worship the sun god, we worship fire, we worship a river, we worship the seas. When we made idols out of it and brought them into our own homes, that's when we started polluting what we worshipped. So I think it's about time that we can lead the way for the world. And where we have something like a GST council, where we have, a couple of portfolios in India, which is be it home, be it finance, which are really important. I think environment day by day is getting more important. So we need a partnership of states, because for a country like ours, where we have mines, where we have, different forests, where we have tiger corridors, where we have elephant corridors, we need to build stronger partnerships and realize that what is going to be polluting as, as the unit somewhere is going to affect 5 other states around us. And we are all interdependent. So it is a concept that, it's about time that we start linking ourselves with other states. For us as, Maharashtra, we've also tied up C40. We're also a part of WRI. We're trying to be a part of all these global networks, because again, we believe that in today's world where COVID saw no latitude, no longitude, no altitude, no temperature change, I think these are issues that are global. And for us, it's not about just exchanging views. It's also about learning from each other, where our experiences could really help each other. So we need to come together now.
Yeah, that I really appreciate that. At the end of this year, in November, we're going to have the COP26 in the UK. And one of the ideas that has been floated at COP is this race to zero for cities.
Yes.
And Mumbai, I think, has already joined or will be joining.
We're getting 5 more cities from Maharashtra to join in.
Yes. So, I think this, it's not a competition in the sense that, who's ahead and who's behind. It's more about cooperation. Yes. And, just what we were talking a moment ago about states. Cities also can learn a lot. You mentioned C40 cities, etc. So I would only encourage you to, join this movement and commit these 5 cities in Maharashtra to this race to zero. And I think there are a lot of expertise, knowledge, practice that has been available today. Just as an example, the World Resource Institute, you mentioned WRI, has something known as the Ross Prize for Cities. The latest, the second Ross Prize for Cities was just given a few days ago. And it was given to a city in South America where the residents came together to build their own cooperative food system. So basically, it was urban farms, that people would grow agricultural produce and then in a cooperative way, having regional sort of markets in the city. And this city in South America won the Ross Prize for Global Cities Development because it involved people, it involved local government, it involved economic growth, and it involved, survival issues such as food, for instance. So this was a wonderful idea of people, sort of really making a difference for their own city. So how do you see this concept of people, being much more involved, civil society, organizations, and others being much more involved in this movement along with you?
I think that is finally the base, because you're finally doing it for the survival of people and all of us together. It's going to be a two-way responsibility. We're developing a state climate action plan. We also, like I said, we're getting 5 more cities into the race for zero, and maybe it could be a really good race, because so normally when we have industries coming to our country or to our state, the states are pitching and trying to have a competition against each other, saying, how much are we giving to the industry to come into our state? Likewise, if we can actually reach the race to zero faster, because we're working with a couple of cities like Pune now, trying to get them carbon neutral by 2030. We're also probably one of the first states that would now put out an expression of interest for an agency to work with us for actually calculating the carbon footprint of a couple of our industrialized and non-industrialized towns and suggest ways to make them carbon neutral. But like you said, it's going to be a two-way thing. And what gives me hope is the spirit of what we call Mumbai. It's always touted to be, it's always seen in a positive and negative light, but what really is the spirit of Mumbai, and what gives me hope is in the year 2016, 2017, we had a daily collection of waste, which was almost 10,000 metric tons a day. And back then, I remember the municipal commissioner, Mr. Ajoy Mehta, the mayor, all of us just sat together and we were like, what do we do with the amount of waste? Because it's going to a landfills, we're looking at waste to energy, but we need our area locality management teams, we need to have our NGOs, our cooperative housing societies working together. We devised a strategy where we said, if you don't segregate your waste, if you're a bulk generator, more than 100 kgs, and if you don't segregate your waste, we're not going to pick up your waste. We're not going to take it to the landfill, you deal with it. Within a span of 6 months, we've come down from 10,000 metric tons a day to 6,500 metric tons a day. I think that's what gives me hope. And this was only about 40 to 45% of the housing societies actually getting involved in waste segregation. And you know how difficult it is to get people to segregate waste, wet waste, dry waste, hazardous waste, plastic waste, things like that. But I think the people who want to really move on it, the people who want to do it, will do it. And for us as a country, where if we can go to smaller units, local units, where you have cities divided into wards, you have gram panchayats, you have zilla parishads, you have also corporates who are organized, you have agencies like the police, you have the home guards, where that these 50,000 people, these 30,000 people, these 3,000 people can actually make a change. I think we can look at the organized sector to bring about a change. For example, in Mumbai suburbs, we have almost 22,500 societies. These people, even one person from this housing society actually starts working for a thing like rainwater percolation, a thing like, and I say rainwater percolation because a runoff area is much more, and that's what creates waterlogging actually. But rainwater percolation, be it rainwater harvesting, be it also segregation in their own 5 flats in the building. I think that is what could lead the change. So for sure, what you say is really very important, that it's always going to be a two-way street. We would always have the policies, but we need the people to be working with us.
Yeah, actually, India has been very blessed that we have so many voluntary organizations, people who have really got involved in all walks of life, whether it's education, it's social development, etc. Maharashtra has a very rich history of that also. And I think that we all recognize, that individually there's very little that we can do, but collectively we can do a lot. And I would say that, finding ways for these voluntary organizations to sort of empower them a little more, give them that opportunity to be involved in development issues in the city, in different parts of the city. Some sort of a program there might be very useful, where the government people, the municipal people, and the voluntary organizations actually work together. I'm sure there are good examples of that in many places.
There's one really good example in the city of Sambhajinagar, Aurangabad, where for the river Kham, you've got a couple of local volunteers and the municipal commissioner and school children coming together. And over the last 1 year, throughout COVID, every weekend they've gone there and transformed that river and the riverbank really without a single penny from the official coffers. But I think that is something which is really inspirational. And, they've been doing some great work there. Individuals out there, some really passionate environmentalists doing work there. But what we're looking to create now are 2 things. One is, of course, a river summit for Maharashtra, because we have a lot of rivers, a lot of holy rivers that are considered holy, but we need to, of course, get them cleaned and rejuvenated. And that could start with volunteering work. And the other is, of course, a platform for every aspect, every walk of life. You might be a corporate, you might be a policeman, you could be a rickshaw driver, you could be an NGO. But if I want to do something good for my planet, if I want to do something good for my country in terms of the environment, I need to start off within a sphere of my 10 feet. And if I can do that and really create a platform for that, that would be really helpful. So
Yes.
it's that's what we're trying to create.
Yeah. No, actually, many commentators have mentioned this, that if you go into any home in India, no matter how poor the residents are, the inside of the home is always very clean, but the outside of the home is not always that clean. So it's about community action. So you're doing something for yourself, but you're not worried about what happens outside your little sphere and the community. So we need to build that community spirit. And, if this program of yours, Maazi Abhiyan and all this sort of thing, can actually rejuvenate voluntary organizations to help the government to achieve its aims, I think that will, help in accelerating this to a very large extent.
That's the idea, because in terms of environment, we normally have movements. I think it's about time that we move from movements to about making it a habit. And only when it's a habit to segregate my waste, only when it's a habit to crush my bottle and throw it back, or, like we have a habit when we're entering someone's home, we take off our shoes and enter the home. So, it's the same thing. So if we can make it a habit to be more sustainable, I think that could really help us.
Yeah. So I really do appreciate, having this chat with you. There is no doubt at all that cities have to be at the forefront of economic development, of social change, of environmental leadership. And your leadership in doing that is really very heartening. And I think that all the voluntary organizations today who are working in India, whether, like Shakti, like WRI, WWF, all of them have been driven by this idea that they should work in partnership with government. And so I really do appreciate your thoughts on this, and hope that, we can take this forward and work together. Good planning always, gives a lot of benefits. I'm always reminded that when I used to travel to Japan years ago, it was always very painful, because they used to spend a lot of time on planning, and they would plan and plan and plan and plan, and you would get so frustrated about it, But at the end of the day, you realize that, they have thought through a lot of things, and that planning has really benefited them in many of the ways that they have progressed. So I think these are great ideas and thoughts, and I greatly appreciate having this chat with you, and hope that we can continue talking about these issues over time. So greatly appreciate your thoughts and your leadership, and look forward to greater climate action for our cities and our state in Maharashtra. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. It's been an honor to interact with you, and I look forward to many more interactions and working with you together for climate change mitigation and adaptation, because there's a lot we can do together. So looking forward.
Thank you.
Thank
you so much. Greatly appreciate it. Thank you. So Anshu, would you come back on the line?
Thank you so much. This was a fascinating discussion, and I really nice to hear about the inspirational leadership in Maharashtra, the kind of work which you mentioned, really very exciting to hear. I thank the Honorable Minister for his time to join this webinar and discussing his vision with us. And we look forward to working with you. We'll be most happy to support you in any of your initiatives. I've been in touch with Manisha. I've been discussing with her, and we'll discuss some specifics. I also thank Mr. Jamshed Godrej for leading this discussion with the minister, and in a freewheeling talk, coming up with lots of new ideas and thoughts. Thank you very much. Thank you to both of you.
Thank you.
So, friends, that brings us to the close of this first part of the webinar. And going forward, we have distinguished panelists who will delve a bit deeper into this issue and talk from their experience and perspectives. We thought that to take a deeper dive, we brought people from different walks of life. As I said, we had requested Manisha to join the discussion. She, the Principal Secretary, Environment and Climate, Government of Maharashtra, also happens to be a dear friend and batchmate of mine from the civil services. Unfortunately, she had to back out today evening because of an exigency, so she could not join. We realized the role of philanthropy because philanthropy has catalyzed climate action in various parts of the world, including India. In fact, Shakti has been supported by philanthropic capital for the last 10 years. And therefore, we requested Pooja to join us, Pooja Tiwari, who represents Bloomberg Philanthropies. Pooja, thank you for your time and agreeing to join with us, and we look forward to hearing you. We know the important role which policy think tanks play in climate action in providing high quality advice to decision makers. So many institutions like the ones which Mr. Godrej mentioned earlier, CEW and TERI, WWF, and a whole bunch of them, they have played enormous role in catalyzing climate action work, and ICLEI is one of them. And we are delighted that Ashish Rao Ghorpade, who is the Deputy Director, has joined us today. Welcome, Ashish, and I thank you for your time. And finally, Professor Rajiv Gowda, I think your presence is incredibly important because at the end of a day,